I need to share with all of you. Have as many as you'd like. This has been a really good year. Quietly, it's been a good year for the Division of Humanities, I think. There's been a lot of things that have happened, things that have come about. And I think your coming here today and talking to us kind of puts a nice little exclamation point on all that. Thank you for coming today, Joseph. And Joseph Pearce's writing, I've come to know it over the last about 5 or 6 months, I think. And it's really been amazing. We met at the Celebration Tolkien Conference. Dr. Schleifer and I were there that day. And, you know, I really kind of felt, I think you said the same thing, a kindred spirit, our interest in the Inklings, Chesterton, but also we share an interest, a personal interest in special needs children and adults, their education, their rights, and so forth. But anyway, I feel like I could go on, but I don't want to take up your time. You can read about the details in Marshall's interview. He's going to do an interview for our website. Also, a book review. He's going to review your book that's coming out. You want to tell us really quickly about your book that's coming out?
Yeah, I have a new book out. It's imminent, sometime in March, called Further Up and Further In, Understanding Narnia. So it's looking at the Chronicles of Narnia, the deeper theological, philosophical, historical dimensions of the books.
One thing that was impressive, if you go to his Amazon page, you can see there's so many different topics of interest that you have. I mean, it's almost whatever your interest is. I think Joseph might have a book on that dynasty. I don't know if Joseph has a book on chickens or not, but I bet if he does have a book on chickens, I bet it's interesting. I bet it's really great.
You can keep chickens, so I will write about chickens one of these days.
We'll get you to save them, you know.
Apparently, I gave a talk a couple of weeks back in Denver, Colorado, and somebody there knew my wife and knew that I don't do Facebook. So if you want to go behind my back, you just contact my wife on Facebook, because I'm never going to know. So he got the rundown, all the aspects of my biography that no one knows, including me. So, you know, I discovered when they were introducing me that we have 21 chickens. I had no idea how many chickens we had. Now I know.
And they keep reproducing too.
They do. They do.
Like
a moving target.
Yes.
Yeah, keep reproducing. Some of them die and some of them get eaten.
They just got to get away. By foxes, right?
Foxes, yeah.
Coyotes. So, but the last thing I'll say, I picked up one of your books after we met, and you know, his book on C.S. Lewis, which is really, really good. And it's kind of interesting. I remember the line from Indiana Jones a little bit when there's a prayer. There was a couple prayers in Indiana Jones movies. I won't get, one of them involves people's faces melting and their heads exploding. But one of them is a quiet prayer. Henry Jones, Indiana Jones' father, is saying, he's copying a manuscript book, may he who illuminated this work of art, this inspired literature, may he who illuminated this illuminate me. And even though you're, you know, complimentary, sometimes critical of Lewis, I felt that same illumination that was inspiring Lewis. It breathes through your work as well. Thank you for coming, and now I'm going to turn this over to you.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming. Maybe you didn't have much choice as you had class, right? But it's certainly great for me to be here. I was aware of Southern Wesleyan, its existence, but I've never actually been here, and I had the opportunity to visit campus. So I do thank Dr. Chisholm for actually making that possible, to get to know the school a bit. I'm a neighbour. I live only about 15 minutes from here, not driving, south near Simpsonville. So it's actually just good to actually have a relationship with my neighbours. So I'm pleased to be here. Okay, so Chesterton, I'm not going to give you too much of my graphical stuff, because I presume you've sort of covered some of that already, right? So, but of course he's a man of letters in the sense that he doesn't stick to any one genre. So you know, he writes biographies, literary criticism, novels, poetry, but the bread and butter for him, literally, the way he earned his living was as an essayist. So he wrote for newspapers, and he wrote a weekly column for various newspapers, and this is how he made most of his money. That and the Father Brown stories. There's a story, an anecdote, that whenever the bank balance was getting low, Chesterton was saying to his wife, it's time for another Father Brown story, because they always made money. They were popular. So anyway, Chesterton's a novelist. This book was fun to do because basically Ignatius Press, the publisher, contacted me and two other people that are known in the Chesterton world. So Dallol Christ is the president of the American Chesterton Society. And Aidan Mackey in England was basically back in the 1970s and 80s just about the only person selling Chesterton books. Most of the Chesterton books were actually out of print. His star was certainly seemed to be waning, and there's been a great revival in interest in Chesterton. So most of Chesterton's books are now back in print, except for the various collections of essays, right? Because so this was needed, and so they asked each of us to, I think, select our 20 favourite Chesterton essays. I think Dale took some liberties and added some extras, but that's fine. So two of the ones that I chose are the ones we're looking at today. So if we can maybe go to the book, and we're going to look at The Shop of Ghosts, which is on page 52. I'd like to maybe just go through them. And it's comic, because they're not very long. But you've got to love Chesterton in the sense that he writes in such a way that almost every sentence is an aphorism. It's something you can just pluck out and have as a standalone quote. And here is, look at the way it starts. Nearly all the best and most precious things in the universe you can get for, I'm going to say it the way that you say in England, because I can't bring myself to say it the other way, but you don't ever say halfpenny. In England you say halfpenny, right? You don't pronounce the L or the F, so I'm going to say halfpenny, but you can say whatever you like. I thought I'd just explain that. Nearly all the best and most precious things in the universe you can get for a halfpenny. I make an exception, of course, of the sun, the moon, the earth, people, stars, thunderstorms, and such trifles. You can get them for nothing. Okay, so first it's an aphorism. Secondly, it gets to the heart of what Chesterton is always doing, and it really is what St. Thomas Aquinas said about the characteristics of perception, how we actually perceive reality. That you have to begin with humility. That basically, if you have pride, in other words, the absence of humility, it closes your eyes. You don't actually see things as they are. All right? You're blinded by your pride and prejudice, if you like. But with humility opens the eyes to wonder. The second thing is wonder. If you have humility, you can see with eyes of wonder, to see the wonder in the cosmos. And then when you see with eyes of wonder, it leads you to contemplation, contemplatio in Latin. You can actually see things, when you see things with wonder, it leads to this contemplation of what they are. And then beyond that contemplation, the deepest is what Aquinas calls dilatatio, the dilation, the opening of mind and the soul to reality. So humility leads to wonder, wonder leads to contemplation, contemplation leads to this dilation of the soul into the fullness of perception. Well, that's basically what Chesterton does all the time. He sees with humility. And I think one of the attractive things about Chesterton is it's humility and humour and humility. He has this great sense of humour. And that's evident. So it's like those first three sentences there. The seeing with humility opens the eyes of wonder, and we actually get here that, most of the important things in life you can get for a halfpenny. The good things in life are not expensive, but even better, the best things in life are even cheaper than a halfpenny, right? They're nothing. And I think that one of the things that we are in danger of doing is becoming blind to this beauty. So every morning, God presents us with a work of art called sunrise, and the lights change, the sky changes, different colours. Most of the time, we don't even bother to look, right? Because our eyes are closed. All right. Let's move down to the second paragraph here. So we're still on page 52. For my part, I think brightness more important than cleanliness, since the first is of the soul and the second of the body. said it's of the soul. So again, it's this the brightness of reality being able to enter us, so we see its beauty, its brightness. All right, so then he's in Battersea, which is in southwest London. He lived there. I'm guessing this is actually fairly early, 1909 it was published. I'm guessing this was probably when he was actually living in Battersea. It's a local toy shop. So the top of the next page, page 53, that lit shop window became like the brilliantly lit stage when one is watching some highly coloured comedy. I forgot the grey houses and the grimy people behind me as one forgets the dark galleries and the dim crowds at a theatre. So the metaphor he's using here basically is a work of art. So the shop, the toy store, is being used analogously with a theatre. So the window becomes the stage. And you forget everything else. This diminishes like if you're not aware of the audience when you're watching a play. All right? So this window, the shop window, is actually becoming a window into another world. Like when you go to a theatre and you watch Hamlet, right? You're entering another world. You suspend your disbelief, willing suspension of disbelief. You enter into this other world in order to fully participate in it, right? To be able to get as much as you possibly can from it. So this is what Chester's doing now. It's almost like that the shop window becomes the wardrobe, as in the Lionel Richie wardrobe. Okay? We're going to walk through into this toy shop, and when we walk into this toy shop, we're going to enter a world of wonder, something, a wonderland, something which is different from what we're in, and what Chester's hinting at here is actually more real than the world we're living in. All right? What's being presented is something which is sublimely true. Okay? Whereas, if you like, again, to allude to C.S. Lewis again, the world in which we live on a day-to-day basis is the shadowlands. Okay? We only see things in shadow. Sometimes we have to clean our windows of perception to see things in their beauty. All right. Let's move down to the bottom of the page here, page 53. It was as if I had, at any rate, stepped across some border in the soul. Right? So he's, if you like, walked across a threshold. And the writer Evelyn Waugh, you know Evelyn Waugh? Anybody know Evelyn Waugh here? Best-selling literary novelist of the 20th century, probably his best known work is probably Brideshead Revisited. Anyway, he said that conversion is like stepping across the chimney piece from a world of absurdity into the real world that God made. In other words, you're actually stepping across this threshold into a deeper reality. And that's really what I think Chester's saying here. When we were in this toy shop, of course, you know, it gets rather weird very quickly. The word weird, by the way, do you know where the word weird comes from? No? Anybody, have you read Beowulf? Read Beowulf? Well, in English translations, they always translate the word weird, W-Y-R-D, in the Old English, as fate, which is a fatal mistake. Because weird, actually, the modern word weird, which comes from the Old English word weird, is actually closer to what they mean. In other words, that the better word would be the word providence, right? That somehow or other we're all attached to a weird woven web, all right? The web of weird, the web of God in some way has connected us all together, so that what we do impacts everybody else. If we do bad things, you know, there are bad vibes going through the web, right? Do good things, good vibes going through the web. Everybody's connected in this sort of weird way. So what we're doing here, we've entered this weird situation. But you know, it's weird in that understanding. We've entered something which is in some ways divine. We're going to be shown something more real than we're used to seeing, even though it's in a fantasy context. All right? It's like you enter into Narnia or Middle-earth. These are not worlds that exist in a literal sense. We can't physically walk into Narnia or Middle-earth, but we can learn lessons about reality, about our world, from being in that world. The talking word applicability, there's applicability applied. So, let's read on, page 54. He gave me the wooden soldiers, we're about 5 lines down. He gave me the wooden soldiers. But when I put the money down, when I put the money, he did not at first seem to see it. Then he blinked at it feebly, and then he pushed it feebly away. No, no, he said vaguely, I never have. We are rather old-fashioned here. Not taking money, I replied. Seems to me more like an uncommonly new fashion than an old one. I never have, said the old man, blinking and blowing his nose. Always giving presents. I'm too old to stop. Good heavens, I said. What can you mean? Well, you might be Father Christmas. I am Father Christmas, he said apologetically, and blew his nose again. All right, now, what's the difference between Father Christmas and Santa Claus? Is there a difference, or are they just basically the same?
That Father Christmas is more along the Christmas spirit, and Santa Claus is more related to the present giving aspect?
That's actually very good. Father Christmas is obviously, even today in England, I think, certainly when I was growing up, you didn't say Santa Claus, you'd say Father Christmas. And you might say Santa as well, but Father Christmas would be the go-to name. Santa Claus, I think, comes back to the devotion to St. Nicholas, whose feast day is December the 6th. So Santa Claus, right? St. Nicholas is where you get Santa Claus from. And it's actually in certain countries, I think in Holland, the Netherlands particularly, it's still the tradition to give presents on St. Nicholas's Day. Because there's a legend about St. Nicholas. Basically there were some poor children and he put bags of money secretly into their house. And he was a bishop. The historical St. Nicholas. So that's where the story of Santa Claus comes. Father Christmas, on the other hand, it has an interesting history. In the medieval mystery plays, there was a character called Sir Christmas, and he was exactly correct. He was he was a personification of the spirit of Christmas itself. So, like a personified abstraction. He symbolised Christmas. And then in 1645, when Oliver Cromwell won in the English Civil War against the Royalists, there was a 15-year, the only time in English history where we've had a republic, if you want to call it that, of sorts, certainly where we didn't have a monarchy. Just for 15 years, from 1645 to 1660, and then 1660 was the Restoration School, the restoration of the monarchy. For that 15 years, there was an effort to put in place a Puritan regime politically. And so they closed down the theatres, for instance, but they also banned Christmas. There was a period in English history, 15 years, where it was always winter and never Christmas. So one consequence of this was the emergence of Father Christmas, who's now called Father Christmas, as a spirit of, should we say, resistance to this Puritanism. And so this was when Father Christmas really emerged in the 1600s. And of course then people like Dickens in the 19th century really fanned flames of, should we say, the devotion to Father Christmas. So here we have Father Christmas is someone who's symbolising the spirit of Christmas, right? Not Santa Claus as such. It's someone who symbolises the spirit of Christmas. And that's important to know that because as the essay unfolds here, I think we'll see that. So let's skip a few lines. But something had cut the cords of common sense, and I could not feel even surprise except sleepily. Something made me say, you look ill, Father Christmas. I am dying, he said. I did not speak, and it was he who spoke again. All the people have left my shop. I cannot understand it. They seem to object to me on such curious and inconsistent sort of grounds. These scientific men and these innovators. They say that I give people superstitions and make them too visionary. They say I give people sausages and make them too coarse. So what you get here is, of course, the objection to Father Christmas are actual contradictions. Okay? So on the one hand, you know, it's all superstitious nonsense. You're making people too visionary. They're disappearing in this dream world, right? On the other hand, he's also too coarse, too vulgar. Gives people sausages. You know, in other words, he's too down to earth, right? He's not spiritual enough. So the two objections to Father Christmas actually contradict each other. And there's a large part in Chesterton's book Orthodoxy, where he talks about the attacks on Christianity. He says one of the reasons he came to be a Christian was that the various attacks on Christianity were all self-contradictory. Christianity was accused of being too spiritual, and then it was also accused of being too incarnational. So various different contradictions. So this is the same thing here, the same logic that Chesterton's doing. They say my heavenly parts are too heavenly. They say my earthly parts are too earthly. I don't know what they want, I'm sure. How can heavenly things be too heavenly? Or earthly things too earthly? How can one be too good or too jolly? I don't understand. But I understand one thing well enough. These modern people are living and I am dead. And Chesterton's response here, you may be dead, I replied, you ought to know. But as for what they are doing, do not call it living. Right? So in other words, the skepticism, the pessimism, the cynicism is not being fully alive. Right? When we allow the spirit of pessimism, the spirit of cynicism to come to the surface, we are actually living less because we are not experiencing life to the full. Right? If you understand life in its fullness, we should be joyful because life is a miracle. Let me give you one other thing on this from Chesterton's The Everlasting Man, I think. He talks about the sun and the stars, and he says that the self is more distant than any star. In other words, to actually understand yourself is much more difficult than understanding the stars. But then I said, about one of the objections to Christianity is, well, look at how big the cosmos is, and how old the cosmos is, right? Billions of years, billions of light years in terms of distance, right? And we're on this little marble in the middle of nowhere, in this vast expanse of space. So how can we possibly think that Christianity is true, right? That's the logic. And I said to my students when I taught The Everlasting Man, I'm going to say the same thing to you. In what way is each of us bigger than the sun? Or bigger than the furthest star? That's the same thing that happened by other students. Well, you can see the sun. The sun can't see you. You can contemplate the sun. The sun can move you to science, it can move you to sonnets, right? To poetry, philosophy, contemplation, wonder. The sun can't do any of that. The sun's just an inanimate object. It doesn't even have an IQ of 1, so it doesn't have an IQ at all. Right? So the fact that you can see the sun and the sun can't see you makes you bigger than the sun. Right? The very act of perception, being able to see. So in that sense, any individual human being is bigger than the cosmos insofar as the cosmos is only matter. Right? If it's just dead matter without a brain or a soul, it's smaller than any of us. So, let's go down, middle of the page, and now I've got time to do the architect of Spears as well, so I'll try to get this polished off in about 5 minutes. It was 20 minutes for the other one. Good Lord, he cried out, it can't be you. It isn't you. I came to ask where your grave was. I'm not dead yet, Mr. Dickens, said the old gentleman with the feeble smile, but I'm dying, he hastened to add reassuringly. But dash it all, you were dying in my time, said Mr. Charles Dickens with animation. And you don't look a day older. I felt like this for a long time, said Father Christmas. Mr. Dickens turned his back and put his head out the door into the darkness. Dick, he wanted at the top of his voice, he's still alive. And there's a turnover. Indeed, said Mr. Richard Steele. He's not very well known these days, Richard Steele. He was, I think, 1700 writer. Indeed, said Sir Richard Steele, it is a most prodigious matter, for the man was dying when I wrote about Sir Roger de Coverley on his Christmas Day. My senses were growing dimmer and the room darker, and it seemed to be filled with newcomers. It had never been understood, said a burly man, who carried his head humorously and obstinately a little on one side. I think he was Ben Jonson, so it's now got back to Shakespeare's time, okay? It had ever been understood, Consul Jacobo under our King James and her late Majesty, that would be Elizabeth I, that such good and hearty customs were fallen sick and like to pass on world. This grey beard most surely was no lustier when I knew him than now. I also thought I heard a green-clad man, like Robin Hood, saying some mixed of Norman French, but I saw the man dying. I have felt like this a long time, said Father Christmas in his feeble way again. Mr. Charles Dickens suddenly leant across to him. Since when, he asked. Since you were born? Yes, said the old man, and sank sinking into a chair. I have been always dying. Mr. Dickens took off his hat with a flourish like a man calling a mob to rise. I understand it now, he cried. You will never die. The profundity at the heart of this is that Father Christmas doesn't just symbolise Christmas, he symbolises Christianity. Because there's two spirits at work in the world as a constant. There's the spirit of Christ and the spirit of secularism, the spirit of the world. And the spirit of the world is always more powerful than the spirit of Christ in political terms. Right? That those in power are usually the secular people. And so they're always the ones that actually have the political power. So the church, if you like, is always the weakling. It's always the one that's always the underdog. It's always the one that's out of fashion. So in every single generation, you can actually test this for yourself. One of the glories of history is it allows us to see this. Every generation since the time of Christ, and let's not forget what happened there, the secular powers triumphed, right? Christ was crucified. Well, of course he rose from the dead, but that's another matter. But the point is that the political people won. They silenced him, right? They put him to death. He didn't come, as many of the Jews wanted, as a man of might, David the conqueror, okay? He came with the spirit of Christ, which is an otherworldly spirit, not a worldly spirit. There's a war with the worldly spirit. And as we'll see when we discuss the other essay, Architect Spears, that the church on earth, the church in heaven, right, is the church triumphant, okay? But the church on earth is the church militant. That's what it's known as. And the Latin word miles is soldier. So miles Christi, soldiers of Christ. Okay? So the church is at war with the spirit of the world. And if you actually read Beowulf, you have that symbolism that Christ is a warrior. Okay? So in every single decade, the last 2,000 years, all the fashionable ideas are that Christianity's finished, it's done, it's dead, it's fading, it's had its day. So you can actually be 1st century, 5th century, 12th century, 15th century, 20th century, 21st century, it's the same scenario. Christianity, like Father Christmas, is always dying, but he never dies. So that's basically what Chesterton's getting at here, is that, the Robin Hood is late 1100s, early 1200s. Then Ben Jonson is late 1500s, early 1600s. Richard Steele, 1700s. Charles Dickens, 1800s. And Chesterton, 1900s. And now we're reading this right in the 21st century, right? It's the same thing. We all agree with Robin Hood. Right? Father Christmas, he was dying then, but he's still not dead. Okay. All right. So, any have any questions about this essay before we move on to the other one? No.
We could save a lot of questions for later.
Okay.
So we can do that.
Well, you want to make sure I'll leave time for questions. I'll try to finish.
Yeah. Well,
You can't be done by 1:45, which is 5 minutes at
But
least.
use all the time you need.
All right. Well, let's move on to page 69, the architect of Spears. The other day in the town of Lincoln, I suffered an optical illusion which accidentally revealed to me the strange greatness of the Gothic architecture. All right, so when I read this, it changed my mode of perception. I used to live in a town in England called Norwich. And it was actually in medieval times it was the second largest city in England after London, because of the wool trade. And they used to say that Norwich had a church every Sunday and a pub every day. Sounds pretty perfect to me. But that's obviously not the case now, but there's certainly dozens of churches and dozens of pubs. And medieval was a medieval wall, but the cathedral had the second highest spire of any cathedral in England. Only Salisbury has a higher spire. I used to walk to work, and I lived on the west of the city where work was the east of the city, so I used to walk through Cathedral Close, right past the cathedral every day. But you'd see the spire, right, long before you got anywhere near the cathedral, right, because it towers above everything else. And it's moving as you're walking, right, because the whole perspective is such that the walls, the roofs of the shops, the stores are moving faster because they're closer. So it looks as if the spire itself is moving. And so when once I read this, every morning I'd have this image. And it was the image is of a stone marching, right? Now we have the cathedral is an image of the Church of Middleton, right? The Church of War. So its secret is not, I think, satisfactorily explained in most discussions on the subject. This is the secret of Gothic architecture. He said that Gothic eclipses the classical by certain richness and complexity, at once lively and mysterious. See, what he's doing now is, Chesterton began actually as an art student before he took up writing. So he knows about art. So this, The Nature of the Gothic was a book written by John Ruskin. So what is Gothic architecture? There's the Gothic revival in the 19th century. It looks like very sorry. This is true, but Oriental decoration is equally rich and complex, and it awakens a widely different sentiment. In other words, that it's inadequate to merely say that Gothic architecture is better than classical architecture because of its ornateness. That's one of the attributes, but it's not sufficient to actually to define the difference. So you can see it was exquisite design of in Arabia and India, but doesn't have the same impact. Certainly no one ever felt like this about Gothic, even if he happens to dislike it. Or again, some will say that it is the liberty of the Middle Ages and the use of the comic or even the coarse that makes the Gothic more interesting than the Greek. So the presence of things like gargoyles, okay, humour in the architecture, something sort of wild, like Merry England of the Middle Ages in Gothic architecture. There's more truth in this, indeed there's more truth in it. Few of the old Christian cathedrals would have passed the censor of plays. We talk of the inimitable grandeur of the old cathedrals, but indeed it is rather their gaiety that we do not dare to imitate. So he talks about a Gothic gargoyles in sacred spaces, the presence of the ugly and the caricature. Anyway, I wonder through all of these various. It's very good. The essay, in one sense, is just a very good discussion of the nature of Gothic architecture. But in one of the paragraph on page 70 here, none of these explanations explain. And I never saw what was the real point about Gothic till I came into the town of Lincoln and saw it behind a row of furniture vans. And of course he sees that the vans start to move, and the impression he has is that the cathedral's moving because he doesn't realise they're vans, he thinks they're stores. So, he wasn't expecting to move, but then all of a sudden, as they move off, it looks like the spire of the cathedral, the spires of the cathedral are actually striding forth. And he said, I come across that interminable eastern plain, which is like the open sea, and all the more so because the one small hidden tower of Lincoln stands up in it like a lighthouse. Now, I want to just, interminable eastern plain. Now, we live in the United States, right? And if you ever fly over, Kansas, that's an interminable plain, right? A plain that doesn't end, right? The English fens, you saw the fens here. I've cycled across the fens. They're basically 50 miles from east to west, right? So it's not interminable. It seems that those flat, and I've cycled across it. If the wind's against you, it'll drive you mad. Because you can't get out of the wind. So it's like cycling uphill, even though it's flat forever. Right? Anyway, on the other hand, of course, you've got wind behind you. It's the easiest. But so Ely, I wrote an essay about the town of Ely, which is in the fens. Lincoln's in the fens further north, and Ely Cathedral, which is a beautiful cathedral, is actually built on the only hill, and it's not really a hill, it's about 100 feet high or something, the only hill for miles and miles and miles. Now, the beauty of that is that you see Ely Cathedral from 20 miles away, right? Because there's nothing to stop you from seeing it. And it's been, that part of the fens has been reclaimed. And at some point, like global warming, whatever, if the sea levels rise by about a foot, it's all going to disappear under the sea again. And I have this quixotic vision of this beautiful, resplendent Gothic cathedral on an island in the middle of nowhere, a bit like Camelot. Right? It's going to be one of these days. That's going to happen, and the only way you can get to Ely Cathedral will be by boat. That's going to be. I'll probably be dead, but somebody's going to experience that one of these days. Let's move on to page 71. As I looked at it, I asked myself the questions that I have asked here. What was the soul in all these stones? What's the spirit of Gothic architecture? They were varied, but it was not variety. They were solemn, but it was not solemnity. They were farcical, but it was not farce. What is it in them that thrills and soothes a man of our blood and history that is not there in an Egyptian pyramid or Indian temple or a Chinese pagoda? All of a sudden, the vans I had mistaken for cottages began to move away to the left. In the start this gave to my eye and mind, I really fancied that the cathedral was moving towards the right. The two huge towers seemed to start striding across the plain like the two legs of some giant whose body was covered with the clouds. Then I saw what it was, and this paragraph is beautiful English. The truth about Gothic is, first, that it is alive. Right? The stones aren't dead, they're living. And second, that it's on the march. And they're not just alive, they are alive as warriors. It is the church militant. It is the west, and all its stones are stones asleep in a catapult. In that instant of illusion, I could hear the arches clash like swords as they crossed each other. The mighty and numberless columns seemed to go swinging by like the huge feet of imperial elephants. The graven foliage wreathed and blew like banners going into battle. The silence was deafening with all the mingled noises of a military march. The great bell shook down as the organ shook up its thunder. The thirsty-throated gargoyles shouted like trumpets from all the roofs and pinnacles as they passed, and from the lectern in the core of the cathedral, the eagle of the awful evangelist crashed his wings of brass. Now, you're not going to get better English than that, wherever you want to read. The eagle of the awful evangelist, what's that?
Is that the altar? Or the...
Well, it's actually, these would, the eagle would probably be actually at the pulpit from where the gospel is proclaimed, okay, and the homily is given, the sermon is given. But the eagle of the awful evangelist is St. John the Evangelist, because in the iconography, the saint, the symbol of St. John is the eagle, because of course he's visionary, right? He's the one that has the vision of revelations. He sees more, sees further. So the symbol of St. John is the eagle. So that's what's been talked about there. All right, let's just go to the end of this, and then we have time for questions. So the final sentence. So for some 160 seconds, I saw the battered beauty of the Gothic. Then the last furniture van shifted itself away, and I saw only a church tower and a quiet English town, round which the English birds were floating. So what we have here again is this, the vision, the dilatatio, okay? That because Chesterton sees with humility something as mundane as furniture vans just driving off, presents to him a vision of Gothic architecture on the march, which is itself a vision of the church, of Christ marching through the centuries, right? For 20 centuries now. And also marching across Europe from the Holy Land. In other words, that spirit of evangelization that baptized Europe. So all of that comes from furniture vans driving off with the people behind, because the man has humility that allows him to see. All right, I don't think we've got 7 minutes or 8 minutes before the end of class. Does anybody have any questions about those two essays or about Chesterton in general? Anything vaguely related to the above?
Any questions? Yeah.
I'm not sure it's so much a question as much as it's something that kind of struck me in contrast between the two, and how in the architecture Spears, you've got that vision of the church militant starting forward as a warrior, but then at the same point in the Shop of Ghosts, you've got the vision of the church as sort of the enduring thing that just won't die, it's always there. Though it's kind of interesting how Chesterton sees it both as being weak and ever present, and also militant.
Right. Yes, that's very good. The paradox, because the imagery of the church in the first essay is one of weakness, but nonetheless indestructibility. Right? Whereas the second one is the church is a warrior on the march. And I think that basically what a saint is meant to be, right? Both. That sanctity is, if you like, being comfortable with our weakness, but also with that weakness having the courage to take on the world. It is that paradoxical connection between weakness and strength. Because the strength of Christ is not the strength of military victory, right? It's not political might. It's not the spirit of Nietzsche, the Superman, that sort of thing. Yes, very good. Good observation.
So how early in the career was architect of Spears? Was it prior to World War I?
Yes, both of these essays were actually written before World War I, in the Edwardian period, the early part of Chesterton's career.
I'm wondering if Chesterton's response to World War I was similar to that of Tolkien and Lewis, or if he had more of the response of a lot of other people that turned them against the whole notion of war and militancy, and if he would have written this after.
That's actually a very, very good question. Chesterton and Belloc, both of whom I love, were far too realistic about World War I. Largely because they both despised Germany. Now, for Belloc, he had good reason to despise Germany. He was born in 1870 in France, just outside Paris. 1870, your history was the date of the Franco-Prussian War. So basically, Prussia, Germany, invades France about just a few weeks after Belloc is born. His family have to abandon their home. They go to Paris and they escape the last train heading north to the English coast, Normandy. If they hadn't escaped, Belloc would never survived, because there was the siege of Paris. Just about every child under 1 year old died because of famine and disease. So he escaped literally by the skin of his teeth. He was a baby, not just the skin of his teeth. And when he went back home, the home after the war, the family portraits have been used for target practice by the Germans, and they basically trashed the house. And Belloc carried that resentment about Germany with him. So he was very in favour of World War I, the jingoistic sort of way. And Chesterton largely took his understanding of history from Belloc. So both of them. So Chesterton was far too comfortable with this sort of, what I think, sort of triumphalistic, militaristic approach to World War I. And both of them suffered greatly, because Chesterton's brother Cecil died in the last week of the war, and Belloc's eldest son, Louis, died in World War I. And in fact, the least likeable period of Chesterton's life is immediately after World War I, from about 1918 to about 1920, when he's actually full of hatred and resentment to not just the Germans, but actually towards the politicians. So he lacks charity. Of course, it's a very short period, and then he discovers good things. Personally speaking, I've actually written a play that was staged off Broadway last year, and I'm turned into a film, called Death Comes for the War Poets. So I'm actually very steeped in the poetry of World War I, Siegfried Sassoon, Wilfred Owen. So I'm uncomfortable with Chesterton's almost bland militarism. This particular essay I love because it's not talking about a war, it's talking about the church. Although the imagery is militaristic, it's not glorifying war, it's glorifying the church. So I'm comfortable with this, but some of his other stuff that actually makes me uncomfortable.
I mean, I think with the military language, I don't know if you would agree with this, isn't it, from a Christian perspective, it's an inner purification. Even in the St. Ignatian exercises, you're fighting this inner evil. In the Sermon on the Mount, you're asked to have a pure heart. It's not an outer. How much is it a struggle against secularism or worldly forces, or how much is this the inner work of conversion? Or would you say the two are compatible?
Well, I think they dovetail, because obviously the war within our soul is the war between Christ and the worldly spirit, right? Right. That's what we have to struggle against and overcome by the grace of God, the spirit of worldliness within ourselves, just wanting creature comforts and taking the path of least resistance. So that, I think, is the same war. So if you like, that's the interior struggle each of us has, that's manifests itself in an exterior way in the life of the church throughout the ages, throughout the centuries. And there's always the spirit of the spirit of orthodoxy within the church is always at war with the spirit of modernism. It's always a tendency in every generation for people saying that, well, the church has to be up to date because it's got to move with the times. And what Chesterton says, we don't want a church that challenge, that we have to stay true to the authentic orthodoxy of the teachings of Christ, and allow that to move the world, not to be moved by it.
I guess I can get another question here. This was good stuff. There's a type of aestheticism, in a sense, that where we perceive, I guess, things in themselves. We kind of pierce the realm of appearance through this perception. It seems to be that we come into a type of ultimate reality and experience this brightness. And it's interesting, Chesterton says, you must excuse me after this, I'm a Democrat, I know I'm out of fashion with the modern world. Is there a sense, it's democratic because it's through the senses, it's available to everybody, it's not like Plato where it's the intellect, that we can all perceive this mini conversion experience through perception? And does it have any content? Is it just simply, is it that we're all one? That things are much more alive than we think? That we're alive? Or what happens in that? We sense an ultimate reality?
The two things I want to answer there, and obviously we're going to keep it brief now because we've got other classes to go to.
Chapel, I'm happy to give a note to anyone who is going to be late to chapel, because I think this is really good, so if you, this chapel's not under class.
Okay, all right.
Like we're having chapel here.
So the first is democracy. When Chesterton used the word democracy, he's not using the sense that Plato uses it. So Chesterton democracy is a love of people, and allow that sort of Dickensian love of ordinary people, not humanity as some abstract, but people, right? In real concrete love of people. But you can also understand democracy. He says there's a wonderful thing. In fact, in one of these essays in here, no time to find it now. He talks about democracy in terms of tradition. He basically says that the tradition is the enfranchisement, it's proxy of the dead and the enfranchisement of the unborn. In other words, that for him, Chesterton, democracy is something that goes through time, and we have to listen to our ancestors. They have a vote also, right? You see, it's the fact they just happen to, the people just happen to be walking around at any one time is not the whole of humanity. The whole of humanity is the centuries and centuries of who we are as people. So we need to be able to see Dickens and Shakespeare as brothers, and to listen to them because they have something to say which is of value to us. And in fact, the real test of democracy is its timelessness. Things that can be said 500 years ago that are as relevant now as they were then because they're perennially relevant. They're never going to be irrelevant because they say something essential. And again, the word essential from the Latin esse, to be. They speak to our very being, what it is to be human. And so that's not going to change. So for Chesterton, democracy is not, people voting in an election, right? It's the whole of humanity having a voice. And that's whole of humanity throughout time having a voice.
Any other questions? I want to thank you for coming today. Don't feel like you have to rush. If you want to stay, question you wanted to ask, that you'd want to ask in front of everybody, I'll be happy to give you a note to chapel. I feel like we ought to get chapel credit for today, but just feel free if you want to. I can write you a note, or I can walk you to chapel while y'all do the interviews. So thank you for coming. I hope to have you again.